So today I'm going to be sharing how I typically go about germinating my Trichocereus cactus seeds and how you can start germinating and find a way that works for you. So there's really no right way to do this. There are certainly wrong ways, but any way that sprouts them and works, I feel like should be sufficient. So it takes a lot of trial and error to find what works right for you, given your kind of situation and your growing setup. So these are pretty much what the steps I took to find what worked for me. So I started off and tried a few different methods, but the two methods I found the best are using a takeout container or a coffee pod and plastic bag. So you're going to want to find a clear plastic takeout container. Any container works fine as long as it has a lid and is clear. Typically you want it to have some sort of depth to it as well so the roots can grow. You want it to be big enough that it can have about 6 months to a year of growth in there. So something like this is pretty ideal, and then the lid helps to retain humidity. For the coffee pod, I think this is really great because as someone who drinks a lot of coffee, I have a lot of these. So if I'm starting a bunch of different seeds, it's pretty easy to get going on these. You just take the top off, pull out the filter, and just poke some holes in the bottom. And you can be pretty careful not to cut yourself or something while doing this. But then you can just draw right on there and label it with your cactus cross. And one of the things to keep in mind is to have everything well labeled. I use little codes based on kind of where I got the seeds and then a number associated with it. And I have actually a Google Doc with pretty much all of the labels and what the names mean. So it's pretty easy to go back and reference if I want to. One last quick note is that it's really nice to use these takeout containers or coffee pods because you are recycling something that would otherwise end up in the trash. And then with these ones, you can pretty much rinse them out and use them again. So let's get started. Now the first thing I want to talk about here is our soil. So one thing you'll notice is it seems to be very light and there's a lot of this white perlite in there. And the reason for that is because I want it to have a lot of aeration, because too much standing water can actually rot your cactus seedlings. And now the composition of this specific soil is about, I think, 3 parts coco coir to 2 parts perlite to 1 part earthworm castings. Now you're going to have to play around and find a soil mix that works well for you. Some people really don't like coco coir because they feel it holds too much water, but when I mix it with perlite, I feel like it works pretty well. Another combination I found that works well is just 1 part garden soil to 1 part perlite. And an important note is you want to kind of filter out as much of the big particles as you can, so there's no real big chunks of wood in here because it can obstruct your tiny seedlings. So as far as actually getting these seeds started, what you're going to do is you're pretty much just going to pour your seed and soil mix into your container. Now I'm going to do it just about halfway here on this one just because I want to leave them some room at the surface to grow. And then you're going to want to just spread it out nice and evenly and get a nice and flat surface. And I would just very gently pat it down. You don't have to push it down hard, and in fact you don't want to because then you're going to make your soil too dense. So just a light pat to make it flat. Just kind of flatten it out here and get it nice and flat. So give you a look here, something sort of like this. That way you don't have too much dips and valleys. So once you have something like that, you can go ahead and give it your spray bottle, give it a nice mist. You want it to be wet, but you don't want it to be soaking wet to the point that it's like retaining water and a puddle, right? So something like this, and it may look a little wet at the moment, but the soil at the bottom is very dry, so we're going to go ahead and get this nice and moist. So let's go ahead and take a look at our side view here. So as you can see, it's still pretty dry on the bottom. So I'm just going to keep spraying it, getting it nice and saturated. Just going all around. Alright, so that's probably enough. Let's take a look at what we've got. Yeah, so that's a little better. I think it should end up saturating here. So now that our soil is pretty moist, we're going to take our seeds, and most seeds come in packs of like 30 to 100 plus, but if you're just learning to germinate, I recommend starting with about 5 or 10. So just take a few, just like so. Try not to get too many here. Start with about that. That looks good. And we're going to just gently sprinkle them right on the surface, just like this. You don't want to sow them at all at any depth. You want them just sitting right at the surface so that when they germinate, they can use their roots and dig down. So then I'm going to set my spray bottle to a pretty fine mist and just very lightly mist. Like so. Then set the top on, make sure we have a nice seal. So the important thing about having a nice seal and having essentially a closed system like this is that the humidity will build up and it will stay inside of the container. So what I'm going to do is put this into a warm and somewhat sunny windowsill. I don't want too many hours of sun because I don't want to bake them when they become seedlings. But the point is you want it in a place where during the day it gets warmer and humid and at night it gets a little cooler. So the temperature cycles are what actually triggered the seeds to germinate. So this step is very, very important. So you really want it to be in a place where it's warm in the day and cool in the night. Otherwise, chances are you'll have much lower germination rates. Now, with our coffee pod, we have a pretty similar setup and process. We pretty much just take a bit of soil, pack that down around in there. Just get it nice and flat. We don't really want it to be too pressed down, but we do want it to be flat so the seeds kind of distribute and don't get buried. So just something kind of like that where it's nice and flat. Then we can take a few more seeds. Just go for a few here, maybe 3 to 5. Something like that. And get it nice and moist. Our water's a little pulled up right now, but then it drains down. If you have a fast draining soil, that's typically a good sign. You want fast draining soils for cacti because you don't want standing water. So, and you just sprinkle them right on top, just like so. Give them another quick spritz, very lightly. You don't want to spray the seeds away, because if you use a really high like pressure blast, like something like this, not like that, you can really blow these tiny seedlings away. So just a nice gentle mist. And then we're going to place it in our plastic bag. And this plastic bag is going to have the exact same effect as the lid is on our takeout container. It's just going to trap our humidity and give us a closed system where our moisture is kind of retained within the system. So do something like that and place it in a similar place right next to our takeout container. So that's more or less how you get them sowed, and I'll show you what it looks like put into the windowsill. All right, here we are. These are placed in the window. It typically gets about 3 or 4 hours of sun a day, but it still stays pretty warm during the daytime. But then at night it gets nice and cool, so I think this is a really good spot to put them for germinating, and that's what I've found. But if you have another place in your home that gets kind of warmer and cooler and cycles, but also has some sunlight. That's a pretty good place to put them. So this is where they'll stay for about probably 4 to 6 months, and then I will slowly start to take them out of the humidity and just slowly open the bag or take off the lid. And from there, I will let them grow probably for another 6 months, and by the time they're about a year or a year and a half, depending on if they outgrow their container quickly or not, then I'll transplant them into bigger pots. So I hope this helps, and please let me know what you think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I will try and help answer any questions as you have them. Thanks.